Can you believe it's the last week of March? Next Friday is April 1st, no fooling. And the approaching Sabbath in our Hebrew calendar is called the Great Sabbath, Shabbat Hagadol. Nobody really knows why it is great or greater than any other Sabbath, except that it immediately precedes the greatest, some say, of all our holidays, the festival of Passover. And that's why 3 weeks from Monday evening, in anticipation of Passover, we approach the great Sabbath. The Passover, in a few weeks, is more than a time for munching matzah. Passover is a time for facing the fact that we cannot blame anyone for our own performance except ourselves. Personal accountability is a major theme, a forgotten theme of Pesach. The Passover Haggadah you will read at any table proclaims that message by declaring, B'chol dor vador chayav adam lerot et atzmo ki'ilu hu yatsa mitzrayim. In every generation, every person around your table must look upon herself or himself as if she or he had personally gone forth out of Egypt, as it is said in the Torah, and you shall tell your child on that saying, it is because of what God did, not for them, for me, when I came forth out of Egypt. So not our ancestors alone did God redeem, but God also redeemed us with them. The power of Passover, then, is not simply a matter of misty memories from the past. We don't just gather around the Seder table to remember a story from antiquity. We come together to share an experience we're supposed to relive every year, every time we recall its meaning and its lesson, and it takes weeks to get ready for it. That lesson is a reminder that the commitments that transform your life require more than words. They require performance. Words alone will never move the stars. They will never change the way things are. All that changes the way things are is what a person does or doesn't do. Actions not only speak louder than words, actions are the only thing that speak at all. Now, we know this when it comes to diet and exercise, right? You could talk about it, but unless you do it, nothing changes. But what about when it comes to religion and to Judaism? Some people talk about their commitment to Judaism because of its emphasis on learning without ever doing any learning themselves. I'm not casting judgment on them. I'm just saying you won't learn anything if you talk about it. Some talk about the beauty of Judaism's emphasis on family, even though they neglect their own family. Some talk about the beauty of Shabbat, even though they rarely observe it, or the value of worship, even though they rarely do it. Some even talk about the supreme importance of tzedakah, of giving generously for the greater good from your personal resources, even though their own giving may not be an example to emulate for the greater good. Words alone will never make a difference. Judaism isn't a matter of people cheering for its principles from the sidelines like a crowd of spectators at a sporting event. NCAA basketball fans cheer wildly through every minute of the game if you watch it. But none of the cheering scores a single point. The only people who score are the players. I'm not saying home team doesn't matter, but the fans may have screamed their lungs out against the Grizzlies in Boston this week. They may have stamped their feet and clapped their hands until they broke out in blisters as the Celtics roared back, but it never changed the outcome. If every game is a challenge for winning, by playing, not by talking, then Judaism is a game plan for the challenge of living. It doesn't work by watching it from the sidelines. It only works by being part of the action. And Passover is a perfect example of what I'm talking about. It doesn't work simply by watching other people do it now or thinking about how other people did it long ago. Rather, we are told, and I'm quoting you directly from the Haggadah, in every generation you must look upon yourself as if you had gone forth out of Egypt. Why? Because, as I saw at the Korean War Memorial with our 32 high school delegates a few weeks ago, freedom is not free. Freedom is meaningless until a person accepts responsibility for his or her own decisions. Passover teaches that it all begins with personal initiative. God doesn't initiate the process of liberation from whatever fears you have or anxieties that still enslave us. We begin that process. The initiative begins with us, and God responds to it. So Passover is one of the many Jewish experiences we observe by not just talking about it, we observe it by doing it. And what most of us forget, or even refuse to recognize, I think, is that the joy we derive from this holiday when you do it is the same joy that can await you in meeting your commitment to every ideal you cherish. For instance, we could reflect deeply on the meaning of life and death. We can talk about it. Birth. It's not nearly as significant as the actual birth of a child or a grandchild or a great-grandchild. Or some of you are here tonight because of a death. We could talk about death, but it's not nearly as significant as the sudden loss of someone very near and close to you. We learn from experience much more than we do from words, don't we? We learn from experience much more than we do from words, and that is the lesson of Passover, which is why we do feel differently on that night than we do on all other nights. How we act, not just what we say, is the most convincing evidence of who we are. Why? Because, as many of you know, being Jewish is a matter of doing, not just talking. Now, you don't have to wait for Passover to understand this or to do this. Thinking differently, speaking differently, feeling differently, acting differently are not the property of some holiday 3 weeks from Monday. What about every week? What about Shabbat? That's the message of Shabbat. We're supposed to live every Friday night to Saturday as if the world had achieved its promised redemption of complete freedom, justice, and peace because of what we have done, not just talked about. So maybe that's why, in closing, Shabbat, as we approach Passover, is called the Great Sabbath. Maybe it serves to remind us not only how important Passover really is, but equally how important Shabbat is for the same reasons, inspiring what we do, not just what we say. May each of you find a trace of Judaism's reward in every Shabbat, in every day that follows, by doing, not just talking. And then, to be sure, it will have become a Shabbat Hagadol, a truly great Sabbath. And let us say, Amen. A word